I'm Edward Kelsey Moore, and I'm the author of The Supremes at EARL'S All You Can Eat. The Supremes is a novel about three women in a small town in southern Indiana, and it's about a year in their lives. And during that year, they each face some pretty difficult times. And because of these difficulties that they face, they each look back over the 4 decades of their friendship, and they find that they still need each other tremendously, and they really come through for each other through all of these challenges. The book began really because of a conversation I had with a friend, and we were both just talking and probably drinking, and the conversation sort of wandered around, and we ended up somehow talking about the topic of bravery. And somehow or another, we ended up talking about who we thought was the bravest person we knew. And it just, coincidentally, each of us named a woman as the most courageous person we knew. And this was not because either of us lacked positive male role models in our lives. I have a great father, my friend had a wonderful dad, but just coincidentally, we both thought that the single bravest person we knew was a woman. And then I just started thinking, what would it be like if somehow a woman could not feel fear or didn't recognize fear? And what kind of person would that be? What kind of life would she lead? And how did she end up that way? And that was the genesis of Odette, who is the main character of my novel. And her 2 friends, Barbara Jean and Clarice, are the other Supremes. They're nicknamed the Supremes at the beginning of their friendship in the 1960s. And they're 3 very different women. Odette is the really brave one. They believe that she is absolutely fearless. That's her reputation. She doesn't believe that, but her friends do. And Barbara Jean is a woman who's had a lot of tragedy in her life, and she's sort of trying to figure out a way just to deal with her past. And Clarice is a woman who is very, very religious. She comes from a family that was a very prominent social family within this very tiny town. And but she's dealing with a husband who repeatedly cheats on her, and she's trying to find a way to deal with that while staying true to her religious beliefs. And it's a tough challenge for her. For me, writing the book was a way to really think about the women in my family and how they dealt with each other. And I happened to come from a family of really, really funny women. And I spent a lot of my childhood listening in on these conversations between my mother and my aunts and my great aunts and my cousins. And the habit in my family was that after family meals, the women would clear the table and do the dishes and do all the work, and the men would just take off and go and watch sports in another room. And I was never much of a sports fan, and in the other kids, that was fun to play with the other kids, but it was much more fun to listen to the conversations that my mom was having with the other women in the family. It was absolutely fascinating. And of course, I learned later that I understood maybe a tenth of what was being said, and a lot of the conversations were really very adult conversations, and I had no idea what they were talking about. I thought I did, but years later, even today, as a middle-aged man, I'm hearing, about things that were said many years ago, and I'm going, oh my God, that's what they were talking about. So when I wrote this book, I didn't tell any family secrets. I didn't, talk about these various relationships that I listened to these conversations about. But I wanted to capture the way that my cousins spoke to each other, the way that my mother and her sister talked to each other. There's a way that they had of comforting each other and of amusing each other and of advising each other that I really wanted to capture in the book, because I think that's just a fascinating thing. And for some reason, it's often absent in books, I feel, often absent in books about women, and specifically in books about African American women. There's a way often that I feel male authors especially have of writing about women that can be condescending. And I didn't want to fall into that trap. And I wanted to try and give these women each their own voice and not try to step in with some sort of outside influence or that, you know, of course it all comes from my head, but I didn't want it to feel like, oh, let this man come in and sort out what these women are feeling. I wanted to try and be as true to these women as possible, and I hope that I've done that.